Mom, I need to talk to you. Come to the living room. My son, Thomas, gestures with his chin, summoning me, Hillary. In a manner that would have once warranted a scolding for speaking to a parent that way. But now, such concerns seemed trivial to me. Reluctantly, I followed his instructions and stepped into the living room. There, besides my son, was my daughter-in-law, Tanya. Her initially timid demeanor had vanished, replaced by a sly smile as she awaited my arrival. "What's this talk about, then?" It didn't seem like it would be anything worthwhile. As I took a seat opposite Thomas and Tanya, she opened her mouth as if she'd been waiting just for this moment. "Hillary, Cameron called yesterday to say they're having a baby. They'll be coming back here with their family soon." "Oh, is that so? That's wonderful news. So, Cameron is going to be a dad." I couldn't help but smile. The grandchild, who once seemed as emotionless as a robot, was finally becoming a father. I was overjoyed when I heard they got married, as if he were my own grandchild. Cameron as a dad. Perhaps it's the right timing then. Yes, that day when my husband, Alfred, passed away marked a negative shift in my relationship with Thomas and the others. The time I had silently vowed for had finally come around. Unaware of my feelings, Tanya deepened her malicious smile and announced as if it were the most natural thing. "So, that's the situation, Hillary. We're going to live as a family now, so can the surplus housekeeper please leave?" I couldn't believe she had the nerve to say it outright. It spared me the hassle of having to say it myself, and I almost let a smile slip. "Yes, that's fine. There's no longer any reason for me to force myself to live with you." They probably expected me to complain or get angry. Surprised by my willingness to step back, Thomas and Tanya were at a loss for words. "You're okay with this, Mom? Leaving with nowhere to go?" "I have nowhere to go, but as I said, there's no reason for me to force a living situation with you. I'll figure out a new place to live. You don't need to worry about me." With that, I stood up. My heart light with anticipation. Finally, I was being freed from this irritating daily life. Though the future was uncertain, I believed things would work out. Then, it happened. "There's no need for Grandma to leave. The ones who should be going are you two. Alfred, it's a nice day today. I'll open the window." I, Hillary, carefully opened the window to let in the gentle spring sunshine. "If you're cold, just let me know," I said to Alfred, bedridden. He then smiled, a gentle, humorous look on his face. "I always feel bad for you." We agreed not to say that, remember? Honestly. It was a kind of exchange you wouldn't even hear in modern westerns, almost belonging in a comedy sketch, prompting an involuntary chuckle from me. The gentle spring breeze and Alfred's considerate, humor-filled demeanor warmed my heart. Perhaps it was the children from the nearby school. Their laughter, carried by the spring breeze, sounded like they were having a blast. Listening to those sounds, Alfred squinted his eyes gently, as if looking at something precious but out of reach. "Kids' voices are wonderful. Just hearing them inspires new toy ideas." "Really? Knowing you, Alfred, I'm sure you'll come up with something fantastic." This was no mere flattery to a bedridden husband. As a toy manufacturer's CEO, the products he created were always in demand by the media, not quite famous toys but still loved by children for many years. It was a sincere compliment from someone with such accomplishments. "Thank you. Having you listen to me makes me the luckiest man in the world. May I share a new idea with you?" "Oh, you always exaggerate, but of course, I'm always here to listen." With my chores for the day already done, I took a seat next to him and spread out some notes on the side table. Listed there were my clumsy handwriting and designs. Listening to Alfred's ideas, but unable to move himself, I took notes on the new toy concepts on his behalf. So, what story will you share with me today? I asked, prompting Alfred to clear his throat with a grand ahem, as if he were a storyteller about to weave a tale. Well, how about this for today? The story he spun was a proposal for diapers, yet it felt like a whimsical tale, sending me back to my childhood days. I listened with excitement, took notes in earnest, confirmed details with Alfred, and we shared laughter together. The uncertain future of home care. Assisting Alfred, who had become bedridden, felt daunting and fraught with potential mistakes. In the gloomy days, these moments with him were my salvation. That concludes our story. Come to think of it, Thomas will be returning soon, won't he? As he wrapped up the conversation as usual, his expression darkened slightly. Thomas. That's the name of our only son who moved to the city and left home. He hadn't been in touch much lately, presumably busy, but I remember being surprised when he recently got in touch. Moreover, that is, I got married and changed jobs to one near our hometown, so I'd like to live together. I remember being surprised even more since it came with a report like that. Initially, I intended to refuse, apologetically. Caring for Alfred and living with a daughter-in-law I'd be meeting for the first time seemed like it would only add to the burden. It was obvious that the burden was increasing. However, Mom, Tanya, the daughter-in-law is well aware of Dad's situation. Of course, both Tanya and I will help with Dad's care and the household chores while we're home. So please. Hearing this left me speechless. Managing a house that's comfortably spacious for three, let alone while caring for Alfred, was going to be challenging. Hiring a housekeeper or a home health aide was an option, considering our remaining savings. But I was resistant to bringing strangers into our home, ending up taking on everything myself. Thomas's offer felt like a relief, as much as it was hard to accept. After discussing it with Alfred, we agreed to live with Thomas and his wife under those conditions. Still, if he got married, a family meeting or something would have been nice, wouldn't it? Kids these days probably see it differently. Plus, the trip from Thomas's place here is quite the journey. Maybe that's a factor? Even trying to soothe him with these words, the shock of Thomas becoming the head of the household without us knowing was apparent. His face showed his dissatisfaction. Even so. Don't nag too much, or you might end up disliked by the daughter-in-law and Thomas? I half-joked, which seemed to begrudgingly convince him. He didn't push the matter further. Indeed, Alfred had a point. In our time, it was customary to visit each other's families for a meeting, followed by a joint meal before getting married. Though I told Alfred it's how kids are these days, I couldn't help but feel a phone call or letter before the marriage would have been appropriate. Surely, Thomas and his wife had their reasons. Yes, something must have happened. I had to remind myself of that, trying to dispel the slight sense of foreboding that had started to form. Unaware that this premonition would come to pass. Before we knew it, the day to live with my son and his wife arrived. Their belongings had already been delivered via courier and were moved in. I had been informed of their arrival time by Thomas, and it was nearly upon us. Hey Hillary, does everything look all right? Alfred asked from his wheelchair, for what felt like the umpteenth time. Eager to greet Thomas and his wife at the door. He insisted on being there for the initial meeting. Despite it being quite a task to dress him in something other than his usual care-friendly attire. Everything's fine. You always look great, Alfred. This was my repeated assurance. Not out of dismissiveness or carelessness, but truly from the bottom of my heart. Then, once again, I showed Alfred his reflection in the hand mirror, moving it so he could see his entire outfit. Alfred seemed relieved for a moment, showing a contented expression. But after a while, he seemed to become anxious again. It was just as he started to say Hillary that, "Home at last, Mom, Dad." The door unlocked, opened, and a familiar voice echoed in the entrance, delayed. Thomas appeared, slightly more mature than the day he left for the city. And following him were two figures. "Nice to meet you, Hillary, Alfred. I apologize for the late introduction. I am Tanya, Thomas's wife. And this is our son, Cameron. Please, take good care of us from now on." Tanya bowed deeply, with polite manners. Next to her, the boy called Cameron just stood there. Tanya quickly made him bow, but honestly, it didn't bother us. Rather, we were shocked by the existence of a grandson we were unaware of, unable to react at all. A son? With whom and whose? It must be Thomas and Tanya's, presumably. However, Cameron looked to be of kindergarten or preschool age. Even if he was a child born before their marriage, wouldn't he be too old? Our silence might have been mistaken for anger about skipping a family meeting and jumping straight to cohabitation. Tanya bowed even deeper, hurriedly. "I am truly sorry we couldn't have a family meeting. But I have a child from a previous marriage, and I was nervous about meeting you, Hillary, and—" "Wait, a previous marriage? That means—" "Yes, Cameron is a child born between Tanya and her ex-husband. But we knew that when we got married. Cameron is happy to have a new dad," Thomas said, wrapping an arm around Cameron, but the boy himself seemed unresponsive, perhaps due to nervousness. No, it seemed more than that. Like a doll. Yes. His black eyes staring blankly into space, showing no emotion. If he were nervous about suddenly living in a stranger's house, his gaze would wander more, showing signs of hesitation. But there was none of that in Cameron. What could have happened? Remembering, Tanya had just mentioned having a divorce history. Could it be that something terrible happened with her ex-husband? No, it's not right to pry on the first day of becoming family. It's probably a very delicate issue. Asking now would not be for the best for either of us. It could even worsen our future relationship. I shook my head lightly, switching gears. "So, that was the case. I'm sorry, I assumed it was just Thomas and Tanya. But Cameron, you are certainly welcome too. Right, Alfred?" "Oh, yes, of course, Cameron. Grandpa can't move around much, so I can't play catch or anything. But I have plenty of stories to share, so feel free to come to my room anytime." Alfred seemed to snap out of his astonishment and welcomed Cameron with a smile. But still, Cameron quietly stared into space, as if indifferent to everything. From that day on, our cohabitation with Thomas and his family began. Alfred and I tried our best to get along with Cameron, our newfound grandson, but it wasn't easy. Just like our first impression, he was like a doll. He would appear in the living room at mealtimes, eat what was in front of him. He could manage his bodily needs on his own, sleep at the same time, and wake up at the same time to come out of his room. But he closed off his heart, not just to us, but also to his own parents and even strangers, showing no reaction at all. More than a doll, he was akin to a robot. What really happened to him? Since then, I haven't had the chance to ask Tanya about Cameron. Of course, it's a sensitive issue that shouldn't be easily broached, but more importantly, Tanya's behavior began to change gradually. Not just Tanya. Our son Thomas too. At first, they were considerate towards us, helping with Alfred's care and household chores as promised. However, their assistance has dwindled over time, now not helping unless asked. No, it would have been cute if they just obediently helped when asked. But it turned into a situation where, even when asked, they would reluctantly help with obvious displeasure, sometimes even snapping back. And before I knew it, Not only were they not helping around the house, but I also ended up taking care of Cameron's drop-offs and meal preparations. When relationships deteriorate to this extent, it's natural to start casting doubtful looks. Could it be an issue with Tanya? The reason given for not having a family meeting was because I was divorced with a child and felt the barrier was too high. At the time, I was indeed convinced, but as their attitudes gradually but surely worsened, it felt like there was more to it. No, that's not right. It's rude to judge people based on mere speculation. I shook my head to rid myself of the unpleasant guesses. Even if Tanya's true nature is what it now appears to be, there's no proof that it has anything to do with Cameron's situation. I compartmentalized these issues and continued with my household duties that day. The suspicion that had sprouted and slowly grown within me since the discussion of living together manifested in the worst way, at the worst time. After a few years of living with Thomas and his family, Alfred finally passed away. I won't say there wasn't a sense of relief from being freed from caregiving, but the loss of someone who had been a beacon of brightness and humor in the gloomy days was profoundly felt. So much so that my memory of the time before and after became hazy. I think I even embarrassingly cried in front of Thomas and Cameron. However, I couldn't dwell on Alfred's death forever. As the chief mourner, there were funeral arrangements and notifications to attendants to be made. I had hoped for Thomas's help, but he declined even the suggestion. Feeling awkward to ask Tanya, who was not blood-related, I ended up handling everything myself. A few days after the funeral, things worsened. Thomas and his family began to lead an even more lax lifestyle. They started acting as if it was natural for me to take care of all the chores, including Cameron's care. As if now that Dad's gone, there's nothing left for us to do. And indeed, that became the reality. Hey Mom, we did our fair share of taking care of Dad. As compensation, it only makes sense to redistribute a larger portion of Dad's inheritance to us, right? Where did I go wrong in raising him? Thomas's crass demand, as if collecting a debt, made me want to bury my head in my hands. Thomas and his family had only actively helped with Alfred's care in the first few weeks of living together. Afterward, they would not move unless told, and even then, they would respond with reluctance or messily. To such people, even if they were my own child, I didn't want to give any part of Alfred's inheritance. Thankfully, Alfred had left a will. As our living arrangement gradually broke its promises, he had made a notarized will with the help of a notary public. The will stipulated that 70% of the inheritance would go to me and 30% to Thomas. What are you talking about? It's clearly written in Alfred's will that you will get your share, Thomas. But 30%? That's ridiculous. Tanya and I took care of Dad. We deserve at least 50%. How could they claim to have taken care of him? I bit back my words and was about to argue further. We're fine with it, you know, even if this goes to court over the will's validity. But what would Cameron think? The mention of Cameron's name left me speechless. Seizing the opportunity, Tanya pressed further. Seeing his kind grandma and beloved mom arguing, how much must Cameron be hurting? Plus, Hillary, you seem to contest the will's validity, leading to a long legal battle. That'll rack up costs, and surely our family won't be able to live a comfortable life. Poor Cameron, suffering from hunger every day because Grandma was too stubborn. But I suppose it doesn't matter to Hillary what happens to a grandson not related by blood. Tanya mockingly mimicked crying to provoke my guilt. If it were just this infuriating couple, I could have fought back thoroughly. But I couldn't bear to make my poor grandson, who might be carrying hidden scars for reasons still unclear, suffer any further. All right, I understand. Alfred's inheritance will be split 50/50 between Thomas and me. That's fair, right? Just like that, If only you were this agreeable from the start, Mom," Thomas said with a satisfied smile. I had to desperately resist the urge to smack that infuriating face. Yes, this was for Cameron, for Cameron. I kept reminding myself, enduring all sorts of things. But it was a mistake. From that day, Thomas began making various unreasonable demands of me. Every time I showed the slightest resistance, they would bring up Cameron. Blood-related or not, Cameron was still my dear grandson. I couldn't bear to inflict any more emotional wounds on him, so I acquiesced to most things and bore it. Until the time came. I kept telling myself to be patient until the time came. How long did that hellish life continue? Cameron, who once only came up to my waist, grew to surpass me, and even Thomas in height, graduated from college, and reached the age to have his own family. That much time had passed since Alfred's death, days filled with Thomas imposing impossible demands on me, using Cameron as a hostage, making my life joyless. It was the same that day. My emotions worn thin, I was diligently doing household chores as Thomas and his family commanded. Then it happened. "Mom, I need to talk. Come to the living room," Thomas called out from the hallway, gesturing with his chin for me to come. The old me would have scolded him for speaking to a parent like that. But after being taken advantage of and exploited using Cameron as leverage, I didn't have the energy to even think that way. Reluctantly, I entered the living room as told. Thomas and Tanya were there. The nervous demeanor Tanya had shown when she first came to this house had vanished, replaced by a spiteful, malicious smile, as if she were one of Cinderella's cruel stepmothers. What's this talk about? I knew it wouldn't be anything good. As I sat down facing them, Tanya, as if waiting for this moment, began to speak. "Hillary, we got a call from Cameron yesterday. He's having a baby, and he'll be coming back here with his family soon." "Oh, is that so? That's wonderful. So, Cameron is going to be a dad." I couldn't help but smile. The grandson, who once seemed as emotionless as a robot, was finally going to be a father. I was truly happy when I heard he got married, but it was incredibly frustrating that Thomas and his wife prevented me from attending the wedding. Cameron is going to be a dad. Does that mean it's the right timing now? Yes, that day, the day Alfred died and my relationship with Thomas and his wife took a turn for the worse, was when I swore to myself. The time I had been waiting for had finally come. Unaware or indifferent to my thoughts, Tanya deepened her malicious smile and said, "So, Hillary, since we're going to be a family only, we don't need a housekeeper anymore. Can you leave?" Ah, I didn't expect them to say it first. I managed to suppress a smile, glad to avoid extra hassle. "Yes, that's fine. I no longer have a reason to force myself to live with you anyway." They must have expected me to complain or get angry. Their surprised faces when I easily backed down were a sight to behold. Ah, what a satisfying expression. Even if it was slight, it was enough to make me feel better. "You're okay with this, Mom? You have somewhere to go?" Their contradictory concern after just telling me to leave was baffling. "I don't have anywhere to go, but as I said, I no longer have a reason to force myself to live with you. Now that Cameron has grown up and can stand on his own, there's no reason for me to stay in this house. I'll manage to find a new place to live. You don't need to worry about me." I stood up, thinking the discussion was over. My heart was filled with anticipation, like that of a young person. Finally, I would be freed from this infuriating daily life. The uncertainty of not seeing what lies ahead does exist, but I'm sure everything will work out. It has been that way ever since we decided on Alfred's home care. Then, it happened. "There's no need for Grandma to leave. The ones who should leave are Dad and Mom. Just the two of you." A firm voice echoed in the living room. Everyone's gaze shifted to the entrance as if on cue. There stood Cameron, who had apparently returned at some point.
Cameron? When did you get back?
And Cameron, what's with that tone towards your parents?
Don't you know how to speak properly?
Tanya was visibly flustered by Cameron's sudden appearance, while Thomas hid his anger. As for me, I was dumbfounded, unable to do anything but ponder over his words.
I just got back, around the time you guys were telling Grandma she's no longer needed here. And as I said earlier, the ones who need to leave are the two of you.
And towards our parents?
After never acting parent-like, now you pretend to be parents, aren't you ashamed?
Thomas was at a loss for words. Tanya tried to retort in place of the silent Thomas.
But Cameron, this person is a stranger, you know? She's not blood related to you. Why would you defend such a stranger? Are you abandoning Mom?
Tanya started fake crying, just like she did when she threatened me. But it didn't work on Cameron.
Appealing to blood now, huh? Really, I'm ashamed to call you my parents. Did you ever do anything parent-like for me? Did you play with me on your days off, tell me interesting stories, or cook me warm meals? Were you there for me when I was lonely?
Tanya was left speechless. Cameron pressed on.
No, you never did anything, did you? Despite being my birth mother, my blood-related mother. You just left me alone and went off to have fun with Dad. But Grandma and Grandpa were different. They were always warm, fed me delicious meals. Even though Grandpa was bedridden, he always told me funny stories. He always talked about the toys he invented in a fun and amusing way. Despite not being blood-related, they cared for me like their own grandchild. Blood-related parents who did nothing for me, and grandparents who weren't blood-related but were kind to me. It's obvious whose side I'm on, isn't it? Still, Cameron, if you have anything more to say, want to settle this in court? I bet you'll run into financial trouble before we do, so what will it be?
Faced with Cameron's stern words, Thomas and Tanya reluctantly agreed, and a few days later, as Cameron's family moved in, Thomas and his wife left the house. If only everything ended happily with Cameron becoming a dad, but things weren't that simple. Days after Thomas and his wife left, perhaps as payback for relying on me, my son and his wife resorted to causing trouble, such as shouting insults and loitering in front of the house. Cameron was at work, and I was out shopping, leaving my pregnant daughter-in-law alone at home, undoubtedly feeling anxious. The troublesome couple was soon arrested by the police, called by the neighbors, and became criminals. I was genuinely concerned about the impact on my daughter-in-law and the unborn child. I even considered ending my life as an apology if anything happened. Fortunately, everything turned out well, and my daughter-in-law safely became a mom. Despite the scare Thomas caused, she continued to treat me like a real grandma, which was as joyous as the birth of my great-grandchild. One day, while gazing at his peacefully sleeping child, Cameron said,
"Looking at this child, I'm reminded of Grandpa."
"Grandpa?" It's rude to say, but Alfred and the great-grandchild don't resemble each other at all. So why would he say that?
Yeah, I want to create fun and cool toys for my child and for children who, like me back then, have no daily joys. No, just wanting isn't enough. I will create fun and cool toys like Grandpa did. No, I'll definitely make them.
Cameron's resolve seemed to overlap with the memory of Alfred. And so, people's thoughts and feelings are passed down. Blood relations don't matter. I once again pondered over the words Cameron had said that day.